In this lecture, I want to talk about macroeconomic policy around the world. For this lecture, I am going to use the PowerPoint that the publisher uses. It's a little bit easier just to get through this material with this rather than doing the handwriting out. So for this lecture, we'll just use these slides, and I'll talk about each slide as we go through this here. So basically, what we want to do here is we want to talk about how the economies differ around the world, both in terms of their prosperity, how much inflation they have, how much unemployment they have, how are things different. Now, so for instance, what's that look to be? It looks like it's at the blaze now. Basically, what do we see here is that for the most part, especially in Hawaii, unemployment is really not that much of an issue. But we know that in other countries, unemployment is much, much, much more of an issue. So how does that happen? Like, how is it that in the United States, and especially in Hawaii, that unemployment is not as prominent of a problem as it is, let's say, for instance, in Spain? Spain, actually an industrialized country, yet the unemployment rate is over 20%. Well, one of the things that we see as we talk about the different economies in the world is that as we try to organize them, one way to organize them would be by looking at their GDP per capita, their gross domestic product per capita. And what that does is it allows us to gauge what the standard of living is in that country. The higher the GDP per capita, the more prosperous on average those people are. So as we categorize those, a low-income country would be where the per capita or per person income is less than $1,025 a year. So that would be about $3 a day. So, yeah, certainly we could imagine someone living on less than $3 a day. Those people would be living in a low-income country. Then you have middle-income countries where the per person or per capita income is between $1,000 and $12,000 a year. So, again, that would be between $3 a day, basically. And what? About $30 a day. And what that means is that for people in these kinds of countries, these middle-income countries, that they don't always keep up, but they basically are able to hold their own. They're able to the people in that country are able to get some of the technology, but they're never developing the technology. They grow, but they're never growing the fastest. Those that are growing the fastest are in those high-income countries. Those where the income is more than $1,000 a month per person. When you have over $1,000 per person per month, you can invest in education. You can invest in capital investments. You can do those things. And by doing those things, the country can go faster because it's making those investments. Now, the standard of living, the GDP per capita, is connected to other things. Those other things it's connected to is the general health of the population, the education levels, the literacy levels. How do we protect human rights? What's the crime level? Even how much they protect the environment. So when we look at a developing country or a low-income country, the one I can probably talk about the best would be Mongolia, a country I go to almost every year. There are some things that in Mongolia are really strong because it used to be kind of a part of the Soviet Union. It wasn't in the Soviet Union, but it was heavily subsidized by the Soviet Union. Because of that communist background, there's like near 100% literacy, but there's a lot of crime there. The environmental quality is really low, and the health system is pretty poor. People die much sooner because they don't have good nutrition, good health. that country would be a low-income country, a developing country. And in some sense, the problem with a country that's a low-income country is that it's almost always just stuck in that position. Even with the generosity of other countries giving money to it, it's never able to catch up. It is always seemingly stuck in that poor position. So, how many are there in the world? When we look at how many people live in very rich countries, it's about 1 in 5. But when we look at how much of the global GDP do they control, almost 2/3. So the rich are truly rich. That 1 in 5 people in this world are controlling $2 out of $3 in the global economy. In terms of the middle income is the vast, vast majority of the world, and they control the remaining third. And then you've got the low-income individuals. That's the most abject of poverty. That'd be about 1 in 10 of the people in the world, with obviously very, very little, less than 1% of the total GDP. And when you look at these countries and how they exist around the world, Mongolia being right here, is that, we see that when we're trying to identify where are the countries that are richest, that would be our green. Shouldn't be surprising what we see. Western Europe, Australia, United States. And then where is it poor? Sub-Saharan Africa, right? Former republics of the Soviet Union, India, China, Southeast Asia, are all low and middle income countries that struggle, that want to be richer, but it'll be very, very difficult for them to do that. Now, why is that? Some of it comes down to just geographic. What's the climate like? Right? It's hard for a country that is landlocked, like Mongolia, which does have the benefit of having lots of mineral wealth, but because it's landlocked and because the winters are so harsh, it's very, very difficult for a country like that to thrive because it doesn't have lots of diverse types of natural resources, and transportation is very difficult. Part of it is also demographic, right? Look at a country like Japan. Yes, Japan is a high-income country, but it's constantly worried about the fact that the population is very old. Industry structure, right? I mean, even something that we talk about here in Hawaii. Obviously, we're not our own country, but in Hawaii, right, we talk about things like the fact that tourism and the military are our primary industries, but those are not the most stable of industries. And then we have economic institutions. What are the politics and the economic structure in your country like? One example being something like Russia, right? Russia suffers from the fact that the politics within the country, right, are largely controlled by Putin. And whether you agree or disagree with him, that is the reality. And there are all the bribes, there are all the other things that accompany that can result in less economic production. Now, the biggest thing that economists believe causes the change in economic growth across countries is the fact that it's caused by different levels of capital investment across those countries. That would be physical capital. How much saving and investment is happening in that country. And if there isn't a lot, then the country will not grow. It's one reason why in some countries you can become a citizen of that country even though you live somewhere else if you just invest a lot of money in that country. If you want to become a citizen of Switzerland, all you need is a few million euros. And Switzerland will take those few million euros to help their country grow and remain strong, and you will become a citizen. And where we saw a lot of this investment happening was in East Asia. South Korea being a perfect example of a country that, after the Korean War, developing economy, and then just really took off. 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, really industrialized quickly due to the fact that the Koreans saved a great deal of money. And look at then the difference between North Korea and South Korea. A border line where the two countries have different levels of saving and investment, a different type of political and economic structure, such that South Korea thrives and North Korea does not. It also depends a lot on how much are you supporting education? How much do you support education happening in that economy? How involved is the government in encouraging investment in things? And is the monetary authorities in that country, the central bank in those countries, are they reliable? Can they be trusted? And are they going to work to make you as an investor feel that the economy will be stable over time? And it's exactly what you see even in Japan. Japan, which became a developed country, a high-income country after World War II, starting in the 1960s. And he's been working incredibly hard to structure fiscal and monetary policies that help the economy continue to grow despite the challenges it's had, such as the tsunami in 2011, the aging of the population, and just global economic changes. And when we look at what middle-income countries do that allow them to make that jump to being an incredibly well-developed country, you need the people to be saving a lot of money. You need the people to be wanting to be educated. You need the technology to be encouraged and used. And you need there to be free trade. Free trade really does help the economy grow because then you in that country don't need to do everything yourself. You can choose to start doing less agriculture, buy your food from another country so that you can rapidly industrialize. Now, the problem with that is that progress is slow. Progress is slow because there are always people in a country that benefit from things staying the way they are, from there being a political or economic structure that restricts trade, that restricts change, that encourages bribes to still exist, that encourages certain industries to continue to exist even though they're outdated. So these are the 10 poorest countries in the world, and even though this data is from about 2011 or 2012, this is still in fact true. These are all countries that have had an incredibly unfortunate bad luck in economic and political stability. These are all countries that unfortunately have central banks that have no respect worldwide. These are all countries that have an incredibly deficient educational and healthcare system. So unfortunately, by the roll of the dice, if you are just unfortunate enough to be born in one of these countries, you probably will be poor for the rest of your life. Now, what can we do? Right? What can we do being in the country where we are? Well, one thing we can try to do is we can try to create economic and political stability in those countries. We can try to encourage markets to develop in those countries. We can try as much as we want to invest in those countries to make foreign investments. But change happens slowly with this kind of thing because you still have the idea of education. If you have children and you live in a developing economy, you're probably going to want your kid to start working so that you can even have more income in your family and try to survive longer. And you probably won't want to waste your time on someone getting educated, especially if you don't know how long your child will live because of the instability in the country or the diseases and lack of good health care in the country. So everyone's spending their money on basically trying to survive. No one is saving any money. So the country just persists day after day with not a lot of prospects for long-term economic growth. You see a great deal of unemployment in these countries that is cyclical. And it's dependent not on even what they're doing in that country, but on the world economy, on how it's doing. And that people are, there's not a lot, there's not a safety net, there's no social security system in these countries, there's no unemployment insurance in these countries. People work for barter situations. They work for cash wages and then they don't save them, or they don't even specialize. They just do everything themselves that they need to survive. And they don't worry about like specializing and trying to earn more, and then using money to buy the other things they need to survive. The challenges are obviously very different when we look at a industrialized country, in a high-income country. There, the changes are, you use monetary policy to make sure that the inflation rate's not too high. You use monetary policy to make sure that everyone knows that the growth rate will be stable over time. But there's a general belief that eventually, even poor countries will start to grow. They'll start to grow and they will catch up to others. And as they start to catch up to others, they'll start to make those investments in capital. Unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that convergence in reality. Probably the biggest trend at the close of the 20th century, so in the late 1900s, was the idea that the best way to grow is just to open up the borders to free trade. That is the best and, quite frankly, easiest way to grow, is just let everyone start to freely trade with each other. And you allow the low prices in your low-income country to beat out the others and to grow your export side of your business, of your economy. Now, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't always try to, you wouldn't ever want to try to restrict free trade. One reason why you might want to is because you're trying to protect a new industry in your economy, what's oftentimes called the infant industry argument. It'd be something like let's say we were developing electric cars and we had really good technology for developing electric cars. Then we might want to make it more expensive to bring in electric cars from other countries so that we could kind of support electric car production in the United States to build that infrastructure. Other kind of ways to think about why then countries don't do this, because they don't all freely engage in trade. The biggest part of it is that there's usually a trade imbalance. The rich countries tend to import lots of stuff, and the poor countries tend to export lots of stuff. And it actually causes grumpiness on both sides. The poor country is then mad because they're producing all this stuff and they don't get to enjoy it. They're just sending it off to another country. And the rich country is importing a lot of stuff, but some people feel like a loss of pride in the fact that they're not making their own stuff. It's now made in other countries. And that really kind of covers this chapter. So that's really where we're at in terms of macroeconomic development and poverty reduction on a worldwide basis. A lot of it involves capital investment, and if I were starting my own country today, that's what I would entirely focus on. How do I educate the children in my country? And how do I encourage foreign capital to be invested in my economy to help my economy grow?